From the news, you are hearing that it's getting very much heated out there in the political space. But while Trinidad and Tobago is strapped into this election period, there's something out there that's also affecting the way we live and the way how we would operate our economy and everything. And of course, those are the recent decisions involving the United States as it regards to tariffs. And to speak to us a little bit about that, we will be joined this morning by former Senator Dominic Smith, and he's also an economist, as we discuss the effects of the U.S. tariff on the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. So good morning and welcome to you, sir. How are you?
Good morning. Good morning. Let me first say thank you for having me and thank you to your viewership. I'm happy to be here to discuss any issues.
All right, great. So first of all, I mean, now that we've had the tariffs announced, it's been about a week or so since we've had that announcement. Has there been any effect so far on TNT's export economy?
I think at the moment you probably won't see an immediate impact, but certainly when we look down the road, there are both positive and negative implications of the move as a country and as a nation. Obviously, there's a international relations component that will become important for us to navigate. But if we look at the economics of it, on the positive side, if we can look to that, this might be an opportunity for us to potentially boost interregional trade, CARICOM trade, and push for interregional business opportunities with our close neighbors. It also provides potentially an opportunity for us to diversify our export markets. Granted, the US is one of our largest trading partners, but we can also have the opportunity to look towards Europe, look towards Africa, look towards Latin America, who are some of our Latin America in particular, to the south, who are some of our closer neighbors. I see also there are opportunities for support of local industries. So the tariffs that have been imposed may create some room for local substitution, where local manufacturers can now have an opportunity to engage in the local economy and push their products in a more sustainable fashion to the internal economy. There's also a need to probably shift to higher end goods and services and have a more value added focus. And the corollary for us is really regional unity as well. So even though one might think that there are a lot of negative impacts, and we could speak to those negative impacts if you like, there are
Yeah.
also some positive outcomes as a result of this.
All right, so let's get into some of those negative impacts because I want to understand, what are we facing, seeing as how at this point in time, the US is one of our biggest trading partners. How does this affect us?
Well, we are a small island developing state. We're considered SIDS. And as a result of that, we are always challenged with the volatility of external factors. We've seen that in our dependence on oil and gas and the ability for us to buoy our economy is based on the fluctuations of oil and gas. Now, the tariffs, these are not policies that are foreign to us. We have tariff relationships with many countries. And if the US has taken the stance that they will do an equal tariff distribution across their trading partners, we have to be agile enough to understand that that is the changing dynamics of the global market and the US interaction and adapt. But if we were to look at some of the probably the low hanging negative impacts, one obvious one would be higher export costs. So our manufacturing industry will now have to the goods, etc., would be now more expensive in the US, and so that might create a reduction in demand. As a result of that, we've been speaking about foreign exchange. Potentially, that can have a foreign exchange hit as well, because less export revenue weakens economies, and every country would like as much as possible to be able to increase their exports. Um, I think there might also be investor caution, which is something that we have faced. We've had a situation where foreign direct investment has been moving out of our country for quite some time. And so there's a level of uncertainty that happens when the US takes certain policy stands that could potentially reduce US investment in the region. And naturally, as well, because we are tourism-based economies in the Caribbean, a lot of our Caribbean brothers, etc., they are dependent on the tourism product. The diaspora and the tourist targeted exports may potentially decline. So these are things that will sort of develop as time passes. But I think that the government needs to certainly look at the potential impacts and treat it on a day-to-day basis, and have some policy prescriptions, and provide information, transparent, asymmetric information to the public as well as to the manufacturing companies to give them a better understanding of where we're at and what our trajectory is like in the coming year and years.
What is the timeline like for those effects to be felt? Do you have any idea at this point in time, like how soon some of those things that you mentioned can start like really impacting us?
Well, the policy directive, I think, had a date. I believe it was April 4th, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
But in terms of the policy, it would have an immediate impact because those things, once they are handed down, we must toe the line in terms of, reciprocation. So that certainly will happen. I think it'll be better to get a sense from the chambers of industry and commerce, how their potential membership feel about the specific issues. And I think within a short time frame, especially for export manufacturers to the US, within a 1 to 3 month time frame, we should begin to see sentiments expressed by them and determine whether or not what potential impact there would be further down in the year 2025.
And do you have any idea as to how much forex we earn from trading with the US? How much of that contributes to our economy? Like a percentage?
I,
Do you
I,
know?
I think in general, our manufacturing industry and our infrastructure has been attempts have been made to improve it. As a percentage of GDP, I think it's quite insignificant, unfortunately, due to the fact that our main export is oil and gas and its subsidiary byproducts. So I think overall there's a need for us to diversify our economy. That has always been a challenge. I think for the manufacturing sectors and the manufacturing companies locally that have been trying to expand, this would certainly be a hit to them. The effect or to quantify that effect, we can't really tell. But from a GDP perspective, I don't think necessarily it would have an immediate impact on the way in which we traditionally run our economies or major revenue earner. But certainly there will be a microeconomic effect, and that will be passed on to the consumer locally, and potentially it can affect jobs if those said companies that provide the export have challenges now moving forward.
Now, as you mentioned, some of the low-hanging fruits that we could tackle in terms of, mitigating against the effects of these tariffs is, of course, changing the way we trade. So trade more with the Caribbean, the European Union, Africa, and looking at other areas to diversify into. And let us start with the Caribbean. Now, I know at CARICOM level, there's been a lot of talk, especially in the last couple of years, about strengthening the CSME and all of those things. Are we at this point ready, do you think, to start to really see that integration of trade within the Caribbean in the way that they've been speaking about? Or is it still a little ways off?
Certainly, I think the way the global dynamics have been moving, there's becoming a need for a sort of siloed approach in terms of the foreign policy. For us, though, as small and developing states, certainly there's always been an opportunity for us to become more integrated and to support our brothers and sisters in CARICOM. I think steps have been taken, certainly in the 1970s all the way up to where we are now, to have that progress. Whether or not this particular response from the US will result in us then taking the baton on and progressing those talks, that's left to be seen by the governments and the leaders in charge of the separate countries in CARICOM. But I am certainly positive in terms of what potentially can happen when dialogue takes place, and I think it is an opportunity for us to really look succinctly at what are low hanging fruit, as you mentioned, and what opportunities, what can we leverage locally to support each other. It's a great opportunity. Whether or not we can capture that opportunity is left to be seen. Unfortunately, in the past, I don't think we've been able to do that in a truly focused and dynamic way.
And how easy or difficult it is for our manufacturers then to now pivot to the European Union or towards Africa and so on, getting into those markets. I know that there's already been some work started, but in a real sense, how difficult or how easy would it be to pivot?
I think it's less of a pivot or a shift. I think it's more having an understanding of how do we begin to progress talks that already been started. I think there's a lot of potential for export in a lot of these markets that you mentioned, Africa, South America, certainly in Europe. What we need to do is to assess where we're at right now, and I think take it on a day by day basis. There also needs to be certain level of policy direction by the government to support manufacturers locally, to support small and medium enterprises, to support even established firms, identify who are their potential partners, and also some level of feedback from the international community and the bodies that are representing those countries in foreign countries, information regarding what are potential trade opportunities for the Caribbean and for Trinidad. So that dialogue, I believe, is happening. I think now there should be an aggressive move towards bringing the dialogue to fruition and seeing what direct benefit can be captured as a result of the changing dynamics of the global landscape, especially as it relates to the US and the impositions of the tariffs, which are not only affecting Trinidad, affecting many countries across the globe.
Yes. So will these tariffs, will they affect the investment by American companies into Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, certainly the opportunity becomes a more expensive endeavor. And so we've already had a situation where foreign direct investment in Trinidad has contracted over time. It doesn't lend to us being able to recapture that investment. But again, we have to be able to create, regardless of policy imposition by foreign countries, an ecosystem and an environment that is attractive to businesses. We need to be able to increase the ease of doing business. We need to be able to make investment opportunities in Trinidad and Tobago attractive to foreign direct investment. And I don't think we've been aggressively looking to do that. And so the result is clear. And the data suggests that we need certainly to look at this more directly and manifest improvements in that directive policy.
Now, since these announcements have been made, have you seen any shift in the way the government is approaching making the ease of doing business better in Trinidad and Tobago?
I think government to government, obviously we're not trying to discourage foreign direct investment, but certainly when you look at the broad indicators of why companies or investment bodies would invest in a country, certainly one of those areas of concern are the criminal element, and so based on those factors, that potentially crime and its associated socioeconomic impacts, it delays and also it doesn't incentivize foreign direct investment. I think that's something that we've been challenged with in Trinidad specifically over the last 10 years. More recently, we've had upsurge in murders, etc. So certainly that doesn't increase our potential to capture foreign direct investment. One of the main things that attracts investment is stability. So if there's a level of stability in the economy, if there's an environment and an ecosystem that is easy to do trade and restrict the ease of doing business, then certainly that's something that these investment opportunities would look at when deciding where they want to invest their capital, whether or not the Caribbean and Trinidad specifically is an environment of growth and can provide profits for them. That's the determination, not necessarily our efforts. So we need to look at the wider picture. We need to look at the factors that contribute to foreign direct investment in economies, and we need to pander to those if we aim to encourage more investment in our economies.
All right, great. Now, we're not done yet with this conversation, but we got to go for a break. So we'll be back right after this with Mr. Smith.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Good Morning Tobago on Tobago Updates. Viewers, we are chatting this morning with independent senator and economist Dominic Smith as we get into the nitty-gritty of what can we expect as a result of the tariffs that have been imposed on us by the U.S. government. Now, Mr. Smith, I want to talk a little bit about, what inflation can this cause, or what is the potential for inflation of this within our economy? Could it put pressure on the TT dollar to increase? Give us your perspective where that's concerned.
Well, I think we are challenged already by the inflationary impacts. I think we've seen over the course of the last few years an increase in the cost of food inflation in particular. There's also have been a percentage increases in healthcare inflation, and I think that's a very interesting area that we need to consider. We have a lot of our imports as it relates to goods and services that we provide to the public. Certainly, there's a public sector inflation issue as it relates to goods and services that potentially we purchase from our U.S. trading partners. Locally as well, there will be some impact, as you know, in terms of our exports and in terms of the price we pay for products, etc., that we put into our manufacturing products. It makes that a bit more challenging in terms of access, etc. So we are challenged by the general inflation that we've been seeing. It has been increasing. It's been around 3%, 3.5% in terms of its impact. What will need to happen, though, is that persons will need to have some level of domestic substitution. So I think if we were able to utilize this as an opportunity and to engage in domestic substitution at a policy level, the inflationary impact may be reduced because we're now substituting products potentially that we would import, and we are looking to negotiate better terms with local producers, etc.
So it might actually be a positive where inflation is concerned. Is that what you're saying?
Well, certainly there's opportunity. Whether or not we take advantage of the opportunity and we look at the silver lining as it pertains to this policy is left up to the policymakers. And I think the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturing Association and other bodies need to certainly have a talk on how do they approach not only this tariff imposition and its effect locally, but potentially many other policy directives that may come from the U.S. and how do we respond as a country to what we see coming down the line. The goal here is to be as agile as possible because we are typically countries that are quite generally affected by exogenous factors. And because we know the symptoms of our economies and the symptoms of our trade potential, we need to be aggressively pursuing alternatives rather than having a reactionary policy towards these changes in the global markets.
Mm-hmm. How do you foresee the central bank, how do you foresee they adjusting policies as a result of this? Or should they adjust policies as a result of this?
I think from a foreign policy standpoint, it's very much a situation where we need to wait and see. The U.S. election just recently finished. There's been a change in terms of the governance and the leadership of the country. It's normal and natural for policy direction to take place within the first 100 days of an office change. So I think it's just a situation where we need to wait and see. But we also need to be ready if there is a change and how those changes potentially can impact us directly. We have smart businessmen in Trinidad. I believe that overall we are very wise and prudent in the way we engage in trade. What we need to do is to just be ready and prepared for potential implications of policy changes, not only in the US, but in other areas of the world. We live in times that are very volatile with wars, etc. And so we just need to be ready for what it comes down the channel.
Mhm. Are there any industries or jobs in Trinidad and Tobago that will be directly affected by these tariffs?
Well, I think in general, certainly if tariffs as a result make your exports more expensive to the U.S. markets, potentially there can be a decrease in trade. Likely there will be a trickle down effect. Producers locally would have to then understand, what their where their profit margins lie, and as a result of that, they may need to take difficult decisions locally that potentially can affect income of their employees, and also the way in which they engage other bodies for potentially substitute products. So I think it's a wait and see at the moment. Certainly, the immediate impact is that yes, there will be challenges that businesses must navigate. But as in every business, these things come at you, and you need to be savvy enough to maneuver in a direction that is positive for your country and for your company. So I think yes, there will be some immediate challenges. Persons may see effects on their immediate income. However, from a business perspective, locally on the microeconomy, this is a day-to-day sort of endeavor, and we wait to see what else comes down the line.
Mhm. I want to talk a little bit globally now. Since this announcement was made, we saw the European Union, China, a lot of those countries coming out and issuing strong messages about how they intend to fight this. Now, do you see, since those initial reactions were made, have you seen any sort of shift globally in the way how alliances are now forming?
Well, I think the U.S. is the reason they are the U.S. is because they are the dominating economy in the world. They are able to print their own money via the central bank. They're able to maneuver international commerce in ways that benefit them. And quite naturally, when policy directives change, countries that are engaged in trade with the U.S. naturally would have a knee-jerk effect. They also want to have a response that is cognizant with the ideas and ideology of their government and their autonomy. And it's expected that they would also want to respond in kind to tariff impositions. We've seen globally, as you mentioned, that Canada, as an example, they are drawing a hard line in terms of how they will respond. Other countries as well have made indications that they will not take these impositions lightly. But I think at the end of the day, wisdom and sober thinking will prevail. The dynamics on the global side certainly will have an effect on the Caribbean. So our leaders need to be bootstrapped and need to be mindful of these daily changes. But globally, I think countries will lean to their foreign policy experts, and they will lean to their um, ambassadors and persons that are engaged in trade-specific relations with their trading partners, and resolutions will be made, compromises will be made, and at the end of the day, good sense hopefully will prevail throughout the course of this dialogue.
How important is something like CARICOM and the CSME in a situation like this? And yeah, how important is it? And then what role can we play as a region globally?
I think the term CARICOM and CSME in particular, it's really two bodies that are meant to unify, join, and explore leverage opportunities that come to us. I think certainly there's an opportunity for us to begin dialogue with each other and see what are the opportunities that can be grasped given these global implications. Certainly, the term together united for the better is something that we can take to heart in these international circumstances. And so there are opportunities between countries. Interregional trade can be explored. Domestic and interregional product substitution can be explored. I think certainly if we were open-minded, CARICOM can potentially benefit from this change in policy. If the policy directive is strong enough, and if the members that are a part of these bodies engage in dialogue and are determined to make an impact based on these changes. So I don't see it as a negative. I see a unification that will happen. Recently, there was a couple CARICOM meetings as well that happened in Barbados. I think from those talks, more talks need to be explored, and there needs to be some level of unity and grouped policy directive. And how do we treat with these challenges that come to us, and how do we become better insulated as a region from the potential ramifications of these policy changes?
Certainly. And then bringing it back home now, what are the opportunities that are you seeing locally? And what sort of innovation can happen within our space as a result of these tariffs?
Yeah, well, I think we have a lot of low-hanging opportunities. I think Trinidad is not scarce of human resource and persons that are quite equipped to engage in global trade. We have a lot of young persons who are engaging in innovative business. There are a lot of bodies that are encouraging local manufacturing and small and medium enterprise manufacturing. I think there's certainly a group of businesses, young professionals, small and medium enterprises that can burgeon out of this potentially. And what we need to do as a country is continue to invest in our people, continue to invest in innovation, continue to invest in manufacturing, and treat it as a policy directive that we want to grow companies and allow these companies to then employ persons within the domestic economy. And in doing so, while we invest, these businesses then have the potential to export. And those exports can be outside of the US. They can be, as we mentioned, all throughout the length and breadth of the global markets that opportunities align. And so there is a great number of opportunities, I think, but there has to be very specific policy directives that encourage the growth of ecosystems for small businesses to to expand and to do well, and to see the opportunity that is before us, which is opening up our markets and the ability to attract investment and potentially export to these markets, increasing our foreign exchange in the economy. So certainly, if you have eyes to see and the vision to bring it to fruition, there are a lot of opportunities for domestic businesses, and I look forward to seeing how the government will potentially explore those opportunities.
Now, when this announcement was made, and since this announcement has made, there's been some interesting happenings out there in the stock market, and I mean, it has a lot of people worried as to what's happening. But I know some global economists have also said that the stock market will eventually recover as it does after some time. It's something to watch and see. Is there any potential now? And I know that this has also been a conversation at the CSME level about, whether or not we should have our own sort of market here in the Caribbean in a greater way. I mean, what potential do you see coming out of a situation like that for us as a region getting into that area of economics?
Well, I think certainly the Jamaican Stock Exchange, as an example, has been one to look at. They've had a lot of companies that have gone public on their local stock exchange. I think the Trinidad Tobago Stock Exchange as well. They have been making progress in terms of getting companies to go public. I think there has been a level of progress there. I think more needs to be done. Certainly, we can look to Jamaica in that specific realm and see, how they have been able to create that robustity in their stock exchange and invest in potential startup companies and invest in potential ecosystems that encourage these type of companies to expand. Um, Certainly, the old additive buy low and sell high. That is the nature of the stock exchange. You have your booms and your slumps, and so it's not uncommon to have periods which are bullish and periods which are bearish. Certainly, this is not financial advice, but the persons who are experts in this field would tell you that these are things that happen over periods and in cycles, and certainly the savvy finance professional would be able to navigate these times. This is not something that is uncommon. It's happened in the past. What we need to do, however, is to be agile enough to understand the dynamics of the market and see where the opportunities lie, where we can engage in. But from a local perspective, more investments need to happen in terms of growing our local stock exchange, and also there's a gap as well in terms of helping the public understand what are the opportunities for investment locally. How can they participate in trade and potentially profit from the volatility in the markets? We have a number of companies that are listed on the local stock exchange, and so there needs to be a level of financial intelligence training and development and knowledge transfer to the general public, so they can take charge of these potential opportunities and improve their quality of life and their potential fortunes in the future.
Certainly. And now, just looking at the situation, there are people on the ground who are worried, have been worried since this announcement was made, and so on. And to the average man, the man in the ground, the man that is not necessarily at the top level of business, and so on, what would you say to them at this point in time?
I would say to them that there's no need to create an environment of fear mongering. I think certainly it's important for the general public to be aware of the international circumstances, and also to appreciate that we have always been an exposed economy. The Caribbean itself, because of our background and how we earn our money, really is heavily dependent on the going and throwing of the international community, because one of our main products, as you know, is tourism. For Trinidad, the export of oil and gas and LNG based products. So yes, it's important for the general public to have a aggregate understanding of what is taking place, but certainly I don't think that that's going to affect the day-to-day operations of an individual. Certainly, they are challenged by a number of other factors in their day-to-day lives. You're speaking about high food pricing, the high cost of rent, the lack of home ownership, the issues as it relates to underemployment, unemployment in general, the lack of infrastructure maintenance. So the general public are faced with quite a number of challenges already. And I would leave it up to the economists and persons in finance and persons who are in the international relations fields to direct and to educate the public on how they should feel about these things, given that they're the experts. But for the man on the street, certainly they are challenged by a number of issues, not related to these dynamics in the international imposition of tariffs.
And then, just as a cursory glance, do you think as we're getting into the elections, and do you think this whole conversation and this is being considered by the competing political parties at this point in time?
I think certainly at a cursory glance, it's important for all parties involved in the electoral process, if they are, positioning themselves for governance, they certainly need to be aware of what's happening internationally. But as it goes, we have a month left
Yeah.
for the election cycle to be completed, and persons have had, a chance to look at, what has happened over the course of 10 years, and the performance of the existing government, and how they have treated with international issues